This podcast is made possible in part by Patreon support, and I'd like to say thank you to our newest patron, Alexa. So Alexa just joined at the $3 a month plus alpha tier. If you want to be as incredible as Alexa and all the other wonderful patrons. By the way, we just reached $100 per month, and that's really, really helpful. So if you want to help and make sure that I can keep bringing you content like this, go over to japankyo.com/Patreon. You can join for as little as $1 a month. I would be extremely grateful. Go check that out. And I think it's time to get to the episode. Welcome to Japan Station, a production of japankyo.com. I'm your host, Tony Vega. So, just a quick heads up. I know a lot of you already know this, but maybe there's one or two of you that don't. I do another podcast. It's called Ichimon Japan. Ichimon means one question, and on every episode, we ask one question about Japan. In the latest episode, we ask, why are these things so expensive in Japan? And the main things that we go over are Randoseru, which are those backpacks that the elementary school kids wear. They are ridiculously expensive sometimes. We also talk about fruit, and well, kind of the main thing of the episode is delivery pizza in Japan, because delivery pizza is like absurdly expensive in Japan sometimes. So I did quite a bit of digging in order to figure out why that is, and I think I came up with a pretty decent answer. I think I'm able to come up with some interesting information because I do a lot of research in Japanese, and you don't really find some of that in English. So I think Ichimon Japan can really, dig up some interesting stuff that you can't find anywhere else. So if that sounds interesting to you, go check it out. Look it up in your podcast app of choice. Check the show notes or go over to japankyo.com/Ichimon Japan. Sorry, commercial, I know. But by the way, if you're doing any shopping on Amazon, japankyo.com/Amazon. Doesn't cost you anything extra. Sends me a few pennies. All right, so let's get to the guest today. So today you're going to hear a conversation that I had with Prairie Stuart Wolff. She is a writer and photographer from the US, but she lives in Mirukashi, a small town in the, already rural Saga Prefecture on Kyushu Island. So she's got quite a bit of interesting experiences over there. She's been writing a blog called Cultivated Days. It's cultivateddays.co about food and life over there in Saga Prefecture. She does some beautiful pictures, so you can go check that out. But also, she has started a new series of kind of guided tours, I guess you could say. They're very small tours, like 6 people, and she takes people around to like nori farmers and local producers, and you get to enjoy the local food and go hunting for things in the wilderness. I guess like the tours sound really, really interesting, and it seems like the kind of thing that I would enjoy doing. It's called Mirukashi Salon. You can find more information at mirukashi.life. So just a heads up, this is not sponsored in any way, but I did find out about Prairie and what she is doing via a press release that was sent to me. In the press release, in the email, it said, if you're interested, we'd love to have Prairie on the show. And I read it, and it genuinely seemed like something that would be interesting to you guys, the listeners. And I wanted to learn more about Prairie and her experiences in Japan. So I decided to talk to her, and I think the conversation turned out really interesting. I don't get paid for this or for any interviews I do. I always, just pick the people that I think that would make for an interesting episode, and people that I think I would enjoy talking to. And after almost 100 episodes, I think I've enjoyed talking to every single person I've had on the show. So, I'm just doing this for fun. I'm certainly not really profiting on this in any way in the show at all. I'm losing money overall. But anyway, that's a whole other thing. But we're going to talk about learning Japanese, living in rural Japan, food, and of course, the Mirukashi Salon tours that are coming up next year. You're going to want to book early if it interests you, because again, they're very small tours. So let's get into it. Here is my conversation with Prairie Stuart Wolff of Mirukashi Salon.
The next stop is Japan Station. The doors on the right side will open.
Okay, so I'm wondering. Of all the places. Okay, so first of all, Mirukashi is in Saga Prefecture. Is that correct?
Right. So it's a little confusing. Mirukashi is in the town of Karatsu.
Okay.
And Karatsu has basically, there's an old merchant center, of course, that was the old town of Karatsu. But over the years, Karatsu has expanded to sort of incorporate surrounding tiny villages into one big municipality. So Karatsu, when you're in Karatsu and when locals are asking where do you live, generally people refer to the name of the old hamlet or the old village. So Mirukashi is sort of a localized geography within Karatsu.
Oh, okay. Because, like in the Japanese language, when you put "shi" at the end of something, sometimes it means city, right? So I was wondering, like, is this like a bigger place, or is this like a place within, like an actual city? So I was curious about that because I'm not familiar with Saga. I've been to like Fukuoka, Nagasaki. I've been like around the area, but I haven't been to Saga.
Yeah, so Karatsu is in the northwest corner of Kyushu, and it's part of Saga Prefecture. We're actually to the west, so we're on the water. And Mirukashi is made up of the kanji of to see and to borrow. So it's translated as borrowed view. So that kashi is actually from kasu, mirukasu, Mirukashi. So it's not the shi of a city.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Again, I wasn't sure about the kanji. Okay. So, I mean, Saga is known for being a rural kind of prefecture, and then Mirukashi is like, it seems like it's even like a smaller area within a rural area. So I'm wondering, like, how did you end up there? Like, when did you go there? Like, what led you to go to this area of Japan?
Yeah, so I moved there about 15 years ago, and I moved straight to Karatsu and straight into Mirukashi. And the reason is that my wife is Japanese, and Karatsu is her hometown. And so she came to the States when she was a teenager, was here all through college and for a long time afterwards as well. We met here as well. But she's a potter. She's a ceramicist. And she was having a lot of her work and exhibitions in Japan and decided she wanted to build a studio there. Simply so she wouldn't have to produce here and send very fragile, heavy items, halfway across the world. So she decided to build a studio there in a small house. And so that's why we landed there in that particular place, in Mirukashi, which is part of Karatsu. So we're in her hometown. It's the only place in Japan I've ever lived. And people do come visit, and they do often say, why on earth here? It's simply the family connection.
Gotcha. Is Saga or that area known for pottery?
Yeah, Karatsu is actually a very famous town for pottery. Japan has some pretty famous, what they call kiln towns, and Karatsu is one of them. It's well known in the world of tea. Karatsu teaware and tea bowls were particularly renowned. So it has that long history of pottery.
Okay. And I think it's in 2007 that you moved there. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, all right. So before you end up going to Karatsu to Mirokashi, did you have, like, had you been to Japan? Like, did you have any knowledge of Japanese? Like, what was your awareness of Japan at the time?
Right. So I had visited only once with Hanako, my partner, to meet her family and to just have I think we were there 3 or 4 weeks vacation. So that was the only time I had been before I moved. So, I knew her family. So I had some familiarity with it. But the place that we moved to was a new location, a new studio and a new house. So yeah, it was, I would say, just through her and through her lens, I had some understanding of her as being Japanese. But there are many people who adore Japan, dream of going to Japan, have studied Japan, know all sorts of things before they even set foot in the country. And that was not my case. I really went with a blank slate and went because she was going. And I have to say, in retrospect, I'm really grateful that I did. I had no preconceived notions about it. And so I really got to explore the culture, just take things in, as they were, decide for myself what I loved and what I didn't love, rather than having a bunch of ideas and notions that then I would have to compare or contrast to the reality of being there.
Right. And I mean, you get to see a side of Japan that I think many people, especially if they're just traveling, would not normally get to see unless they specifically look for it, right? Like, because most people just go to like the big cities and they don't go to these little towns, right? So you get to kind of experience a little bit different.
I was sort of launched into the off the beaten path location, and went directly into a family, which is, I think, an unusual situation as well. So my lens into Japan and its culture was really the lens of the family I was a part of.
Yeah. So what about like transitioning to life in Japan in this,
Mm-hmm.
like, I mean, you didn't really speak the language, it seems, and, this was
Right.
mostly new to you. I mean, you had some awareness, but,
Mm-hmm.
how was that? What did you think? Like, were there any difficulties, like adjusting to new life in this area of Japan?
For sure. It was quite overwhelming in the beginning because I really spoke no Japanese before I went. And, there's a challenge of that on top of the challenge of, entering into a family who already has a long history of communication, relationships, sort of a way of being as a unit. So I was not only finding my way in the culture and in the language, but within this family dynamic as well. So it was quite overwhelming. It was quite lonely, I would say, in the beginning. But I really feel like it was sort of this incredibly immersive experience. And that part was really rewarding. Right? I didn't have to find my way in. I didn't have to create relationships to really get an insider's view. I was in that from day one.
True. Yeah. I mean, I heard you, the way you pronounce like Mirukashi and you explain the kanji and all that. It seems like you've got a pretty good grasp of the language now, but, what was that journey for you? Like, were you studying on your own, or like, how did you, become familiar with the language? What did you do?
Yeah, it was a long, slow journey because, again, I'm in this rural area, so there isn't access to a language school, which you might find in a city or in a more urban environment. And on top of that, there's the challenge of, I'm sure you know this, that Japan has so many different dialects.
Oh, yeah. And the more rural you get, the more dialect it gets.
Right. The more pronounced the dialect is. Yeah. So, I was studying on my own, to answer your question, just sort of moving through textbooks, doing audio programs, doing whatever I could get my hands on to learn. But I would have all these funny moments where I would study and feel like, oh, I had a breakthrough, I made it. And then I'd have dinner with my family and not understand a word they said because they were all speaking Karatsu, which is the local dialect.
Yeah.
And in Japan, the dialects do not sound like other dialects or even like the official language. So there were many discouraging moments. But it was really I credit my work and my writing as what really, pushed me to a new level of understanding, because I decided I really wanted to write about Japanese food culture. I wanted to interview food producers. And so I just put myself out there with a lot of help from my partner, Hanako, at first, but more and more became independent. And it was through, lots of interviewing, recording those interviews, coming home and listening to the recordings, transcribing, looking up words I didn't understand. I feel like that's really how I got proficient at the language. And I still don't speak Karatsu, but I do fine with day-to-day Japanese.
Yeah. I mean, but I think you point out something really good there, where like, it's really difficult to get good at a language if you're only trying to get good at it just because, like, I don't know, because you want to learn it. But when you're using it and for a goal, right? You had something you wanted to do with it, and you were pushing yourself to do these interviews and record it and listen and understand it so that you could then explain it in English. Now you have an extra motivating factor and these like real accomplishable concrete goals that every time you achieve it, you go like, yes, I did it. Okay. Now I got to figure out this sentence.
Absolutely. And really wanting to do justice to the interviews to make sure I didn't mess up people's stories or, misunderstand and mistranslate what they were.
Right.
So yeah, that was great. And it was a wonderful measure of my progress, because I just noticed, after a year, after the second year, that I had to look up many fewer words than I used to, or, I would understand things much better than I had initially. So.
Right. Is there any interesting Karatsu dialect words that you can think of off the top of your head? Any interesting? I mean, I guess a noun would be easier to explain than some of the grammatical differences, but any interesting words you can think of?
Off the top of my head, let's see. Well, actually, I every now and then people in my family laugh because although I've sort of tried not to learn karatsuben just because I don't want to get mixed up when I'm out in the world representing myself, it definitely seeps in.
It happens, yeah.
It happens. And I had this one moment where we were dropping something off at my sister-in-law's house, and we left, and we were just saying goodbye. And very casually in Japan, when you're saying goodbye to someone, you sort of say, jane, or I'll see you later.
Yeah.
But in karatsuben, it's sondarare. And I said that, not thinking. I just said sondarare, which is the karatsu version of saying see you later. And they all just started cracking up because unbeknownst to me, I had been speaking karatsuben.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes you absorb it and you don't realize that, that's the dialect version. Okay.
Right.
Oh, that's fun. I love learning like the little dialectal variations. That's always really interesting. Okay, so then so originally you're a photographer, is that correct?
Yeah, I'm a writer and a photographer, and I have loved both of those medium for as long as I can remember. And I really believe it's that I could never make a choice, that I sort of ended up doing both in parallel for a long time. I studied documentary writing and also studied photography, and just, I think, quickly realized that some form of journalism or some form of writing with images was what I wanted to do.
Okay. And then so that led you to start writing about your time in Mirukashi and the food and the local, like, I guess, producers, growers and all that?
Yeah, basically I landed in Japan with those skills, but I was still quite young, so I hadn't developed a career, before moving there. But I had those skills, and I would say it was sort of a natural progression in that those were my skills. I also knew I didn't want to follow the traditional track of teaching English in Japan. I really wanted to find some very meaningful work if I was going to have a good experience there. And I fell in love with, just for myself, I fell in love with the food and the food culture. And so naturally my work gravitated towards that. In the beginning, I was writing about crafts as well and about other things. But I just found that more and more I wanted to explore the food and the food culture. And so I became much more concentrated on that. And that's where the blog for me, I started Cultivated Days, which was a blog, but kind of formalized, pretty formal essays about my experience learning to cook and learning about the food culture there. And I started it as a way to just synthesize my own experiences because I didn't have a lot of people I could talk to about it in Japan. And writing has always been the way that I sort of organize my thoughts and figure out exactly what I'm thinking. And so that was a way for me to process everything I was learning and doing. So that's sort of where that journey into writing specifically about food and food culture came.
So do you remember like what was maybe like your first interview or one of your first interviews? Like what was like the thing maybe that said like, oh, I have to talk to this person? Like what caught your attention?
Well, I'll say actually what caught my attention in terms of the world of food in Japan was my mother-in-law's cooking, was home cooking at first. And that was really, it came out of when we first moved there, our house wasn't quite ready for us to live in. So we lived with my in-laws for about 2 or 3 months. And so I was eating at their table every night, and she was just an extraordinary cook, home cook. She's sort of at the tail end of the generation that still did everything by scratch, make your own pickles, cook all of the meals from scratch. And again, having no language facility while everyone else was sort of chatting around the dinner table and I couldn't necessarily participate in the conversation, I found myself just experiencing and studying the food and the flavors. And I got really interested in them, and then sort of spent a lot of time just shadowing my mother-in-law. Her name is Kuniko, and I write about her a lot, shadowing her in the kitchen. And it was a way for me to sort of create a relationship with her before I could speak the language. So it was really through her that I got very interested in the flavors and the beauty. The aesthetics of Japanese food is just exquisite. And she presented it in sort of a very elevated and elegant but approachable way, even at home each night. So I really wanted to learn that from her. And I think it was through that and then wanting to better understand the history of food and the culture of food that I started reading more, started learning more about, what else was out there beyond just what she was cooking each night. And so from there, I got interested in, I interviewed a local sake brewer or a local sushi chef. And just, it was my curiosity and wanting to know more and to see how they did what they did and why they did what they did that led me out. And I started close to home, of course, with people who are nearby. And then as I got more and more proficient in the language and more focused in my writing, started venturing further.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, this, I think, probably goes back a little bit to the language thing again, where like, if you can't speak to the mother-in-law, the person in the house, you don't have to speak to them about like, what am I going to talk about? The weather or something? No. You can just like do something with them. Right. Like try to cook and you can ask like, what's this? What's this? What's this? And little by little, you start to absorb that. And then pretty soon you can actually start talking about the food. So
yeah,
it takes time, but yeah.
So many ways to communicate outside of language. And it was lovely. She would chatter to me the whole time. I had no idea what she was saying.
Perfect listening, right?
Yeah. And it was just a sweet way to sort of initiate a relationship with her and become part of the family and learn as well.
Yeah. That sounds, I mean, that's like the ideal learning situation pretty much.
It really is. Yeah.
So I mean, of course, there's always like, Japan is really known for its like regional specialties, right? Like whether it's like the souvenirs or like the actual like cuisine, like the food. Is Karatsu known for some specific dishes, or like what is kind of like the famous thing in that area?
Well, I think, geographically, we have a wonderful, we are on the Sea of Japan. So there's a wonderful fish culture, lots of fresh seafood coming in, as well as having tons of good fertile farmland. And I think beyond a specific dish or a specific food, what Karatsu is really known for and why a lot of people visit is because it is this old pottery center and there are a lot of craftspeople there. So it's a really wonderful place to experience the marriage between the vessel and the food, which is such an important part of Japanese cuisine, the presentation, the choice of, dish that you serve or eat the food from. And so a lot of people come not so much for one specific flavor, but to really get a full experience of the meal, from the fresh ingredients that were gathered and cooked that morning and presented in usually local pottery made by local craftspeople, to really see that, it's such a big part of Japanese culture, not just the flavors and the techniques, but how you serve the food, the aesthetics of the food.
Yeah.
And that includes the vessels.
Yeah. And Japan has a lot of vessels. Like
it does,
on a single tray, it's like you got a whole bunch of plates.
Right. You get a chance to experience a whole bunch of different styles and shapes and sizes and glazes just in a simple.
But it's really, I mean, I love, Western food. I love like a 4-course thing, whatever. I mean, but the thing is like, it's a lot of food, right? Like you get like these big dishes after a big dish, after a big dish, after a big dish. Kind of the nice thing about a lot of Japanese cuisine is you get to try a bunch of things in a much smaller portion. So that's always nice because you get full on one thing.
Right. They're very reasonable portions and you get to have, a lot of different tastes and textures throughout the course, but you never leave feeling that, you're stuffed to the gills.
Yeah.
Perfectly satiated.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So then could you tell me like a little bit about, so like you're, I guess more on the professional side. So you start the website, right? Is that kind of like where this all starts for you in Japan?
Right. So I started Cultivated Days and that's where I started putting out these. In the beginning, it was sort of randomly timed, essays with images about seasonal food. And over time, it became more and more formalized and more organized. And it basically progressed into a pretty complete series of essays, which I called 72 Seasons of Eating. And what I did is I would publish twice a month, and they would be essays that corresponded to the micro seasons, which Japan has. Japan's ancient almanac sort of divides the year not into just the 4 seasons, but into 24 seasons. And then each of those are divided further into 3 micro seasons. So we have, 1 year on the calendar when it comes to food and flavors and agriculture. We have these micro seasons that last about 5 days each. And it's really about clocking sort of when ingredients come come into season, the foods, the sights, the smells, the temperature of the air. It's following nature through its minute progressions throughout the year.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was, we do a lot of foraging where I live because we're in the countryside. All of the fish and vegetables are very fresh and seasonal. So I just started writing these essays and publishing them sort of in tune with that calendar to take people through a journey of eating throughout the year in Japan. And so over time, over about 3 years, that coalesced into this sort of formal group of 72 essays that could track one single year, each of those micro seasons.
Mm. And then from there, like I would assume that because of this writing that you're doing, you probably started getting people saying like, can you take me around? Like, I want to go see like where you live. Like, is that the case?
There's a lot of interest. There were a lot of interest in recipes, people who were fascinated by the food and wanted to know how to cook it themselves. And then I think, people who just really got interested in that lifestyle, one that follows so closely these small shifts from season to season and the food that goes along with it. There was a lot of interest in people. And I think now, it's so easy now to get to Tokyo, to get to Kyoto, to get to some of these bigger hubs.
Mm-hmm.
And I think more and more people, especially repeat visitors, are wanting to get further into the culture and the countryside and have a more immersive experience.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of interest building up for sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then I know you have the Mirukashi Salon, this whole new project coming up, but is that kind of your first entry into like the more, I guess you would say, travel tourism side of things, or were you already kind of experimenting with that?
So pre-pandemic, things have changed.
Pre-pandemic, exactly. Let's rewind.
Let's rewind, because there's been no travel for the last 3 years.
I know full well I can't go.
I know, to everyone's eternal frustration. So I would say I was just getting into it. I was just launching into it pre-pandemic. And I started by designing what I called hosted travel. And I was working with a company out of Vancouver called Ace Camps. And it was a wonderful collaboration where they provided the infrastructure, the gathering of clients and registration and sort of all of those logistical details. And I did the content creation. So I created an experience, a 6-day experience in Karatsu, all about food and food culture and artisans. So food makers, craft makers.
Mm-hmm.
So I worked with them to create that. And that went really, really well. And it was very, a lot of interest, a lot of participation. So that was my first foray into it.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to continue those programs next year as well through Ace Camps. But those tend to be more focused on going out to restaurants, to meeting some producers, sort of outwardly focused.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew for a long time that I also wanted to do something that was very much sort of in the kitchen, at the dining table, foraging, sort of hands-on, more culinary focused. So that's where the Mirukashi Salon came from. Mm-hmm. It was an idea I had been sort of percolating in my mind for quite some time, that I could do these shorter, more intensive, more immersive workshops where you really get hands-on. You get to go to the fish market, you get to go to the vegetable market, foraging when we can, gather all those things in the kitchen and cook together. And then plate together. Hanako, my partner, is a ceramicist, and her studio is right there. So we can really incorporate local pottery, choosing dishes, the aesthetics of presentation. So the salon is much more hands-on.
Mm-hmm. So could you give like a little bit more detail about like what one of these experiences would be like? I think there are multiple days, and you have like kind of a whole itinerary, it seems, and like I was reading in the email, so like it seems like something I would enjoy doing, but I love food and I love doing all that stuff. But could you kind of run us through so we get a better idea? And so they're starting in 2023, right?
Yeah, so they'll start next year. And this is all, the idea has been around for a long time, but I really decided to go ahead and design them and launch them. But I put them out in the future a little bit because Japan is just opening up, barely opening up. So for 2023, these will begin. And so the basic structure is I'm offering about 6 of them per year. And the basic structure is the same for each one, but each one is really intensely tailored to the season. So the experience of each will be quite different. But the basic structure is, with travel in and travel out days, it's a 5-day program, 4 nights in Karatsu. And so we will spend sort of the first day getting to know each other and doing an intensive culinary experience at my home in Mirukashi. And so that will be gathering seasonal ingredients, planning a meal, cooking together, plating and eating, probably long into the evening together. So going through that experience. It will also incorporate 1 full day of sort of external activities. And that could be, for example, in the fall for our November program, we will go visit a soy brewery because brewing is something that happens early in the winter. Or, for example, in my February program, we will go travel over to the Ariake Sea, which is in Saga Prefecture in Saga City. And it's one of the main areas for cultivating nori. So we'll actually get on a boat and head out to the Ariake Sea and see the nori fields and see how nori is cultivated.
That's awesome.
And it's a very specific winter delicacy. It's the best season is February for that. So each program will incorporate some sort of seasonal activity like that, where we're meeting a producer, we're meeting someone who's working in food. And then we'll have a third day, which is going to be, again, based in Mirukashi with us, but split. So we'll have a morning session at Hanako's studio where people will get a chance to see throwing demonstrations to better understand how pottery is made and the perspective of the maker. From a Japanese perspective, what goes into considering what kinds of dishes to make. If you travel to Japan, you see that the sizes are very different and that you don't eat a meal with a full matching set. If you have a circular plate, you also want a square plate. You want a lot of variety and rhythm to the meal. So she'll really talk about sort of from the maker's perspective, what goes into the food culture there. And then we'll have one final culinary session where we'll cook a meal together again, having, gone through it, having learned so much about the food and the food culture. We'll make one last feast together.
Nice.
Yeah.
And what is your home one of like these old like Japanese farm kind of houses? Like what would be the lodging like that people would be staying in?
So actually the lodging is going to be a local hotel, the Seaside Hotel, which is a beautiful spot on the water. All the rooms have a perfect view out to the water. We don't have capacity for lodging at our home right now, but it will be the location of the activities. So each morning, everyone up the hill to our home. And, in Japan, most people live very close to each other, but we actually live about 5 minutes out of town, up on a hill, in a very rural setting. And our home was built, the studio home were built in 2006. So it's not the old minka, it's not the old farmhouse, but it is very like contemporary Japanese design, I would say.
Cool. No, I mean, hey, but you get the best of both. You get to, have a nice little hotel stay and you get to experience like almost like a home experience.
Yeah. And I think it's lovely too, because the hotel's right by the water and we are more up in the mountains. And that's, for me, it's the sea and the mountains, the combination of both that I think, you can find that in many places in Japan, but it really defines the food culture in Karatsu.
Definitely. So what about like for example, like the local, producers and all that you're working with and that I'm sure you've probably already knew them from, your interviews and your previous work. Like what, have you gotten any feedback from them? Are they like looking forward to this? Like what are their take on like, foreign tourism, like starting back up for example?
Yeah, absolutely. I think people are really anxious for the doors to open and people to come in. Over the years, we've definitely seen a bigger increase in foreign travelers in a place like Karatsu that is so remote, and is so rural. And I think, chefs in restaurants, food producers are really excited because I think there's so much interest right now outside of Japan in Japanese food and food culture. And so you have a lot of these travelers coming through who are just very enthusiastic to learn, to taste, to understand, to experience. And that's really invigorating for someone who's a maker or producer, to sense that appreciation and that interest and to feel that their ideas and their products are, moving beyond the borders of Japan.
Yeah. Like it was, I was going to Japan like every summer up
Mm-hmm.
until the pandemic. And, like I started going to Japan in like 2006 or seven, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
maybe six. Anyway, so one of those years. But so like I noticed just the ever increasing amount of tourists. And even like when I was going in maybe like 2019, like I was in Fukuoka a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And there was, like more, tourists. There were more people like of foreign origin working in like the convenience stores. Like it was growing and growing and growing. And then pandemic, like totally stopped.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's been very noticeable.
Yeah.
There's definitely been an influx of both people moving in, to live in Japan and live and work in Japan, but also, yeah, travelers. I think just over the last, I can't say for sure, but I've been there 15 years and I've definitely seen it in my time there, a growing interest in Japan as a destination.
Yeah. And I guess Fuku is like very easy to get to. Like the airport is right by the city, and there's more like flights coming in from various places. So it seems
Yeah,
like it's not that hard to get to Saga these days.
it's really not. Fukuoka is our hub, and we actually fly from the States. Even we fly directly into Fukuoka, so you can get there. And then it's a very manageable city. It's quite a lovely city, for people who do want to spend some time in the city. And then Karatsu is an hour and 15 minutes on the train,
Okay.
50 minutes by car.
Yeah.
So it's really a pretty direct route, very easy place to get to. And I think with trains and, even the Shinkansen, the bullet train has expanded its reach through Kyushu. So we're seeing much more access into Kyushu as a whole, and much more access into more rural areas like where we are.
Definitely. Yeah. I spent a lot of time in Fukuoka. Love it. And it's a very compact city. And from there you can get to, that's kind of the hub in Kyushu. Like you can go pretty much everywhere.
Right.
Yeah. So the Mirukashi Salon is starting. Is the first session is in February? Is that correct?
Yep. So the first session's in February, mid-February. It's kind of a unusual or unlike. It's not the kind of time of year most people think to go to Japan, but I actually think our February session is one of the most interesting because it is, by the almanac, the start of spring. It's February. It's the start of our foraging season. So we start going out and collecting fukinoto, which are butterbur buds. It's a sort of bitter, earthy flower that emerges from a still cold earth in the spring.
Wow.
So it's sort of the very beginning of the growing season where we are. And so it's a very exciting time. Everybody's been waiting for things to start leafing out and for little green shoots to come out of the earth. And it's also the time we're going to, like I mentioned before, do the trip to see nori cultivation. And this is the kind of thing that is, you really can't do on your own, to get on a boat to go out and see how nori is cultivated. So I feel like it's a really special offering for February.
Yeah. That's the kind of thing you see on like NHK World or something.
Right. So although it's still going to be a little bit chilly.
Of course.
It's Kyushu, so it's never that cold. It's going to be lotus, but I think it's a really exciting season because you really will get to have all of those wonderful winter delicacies. The fatty fish and nori and these things that we associate with winter, but also these first tastes of spring, which are really exciting and really unusual.
Yeah. So if people are interested, then what is where do they go? What do they do?
Yeah. So everything is on my website. The website is mirukashi.life, www.mirukashi.life. And if you go to that website, the whole, the outline of the program is explained. And there's a page for salon sessions where you can click through and see the specific itinerary for each session. So that's where you get a sense of, what the activities are, what the flavors might be for that season that you're considering. And it's pretty straightforward. The website will take you through. And if you're interested, you can continue on through it. There's a place to register as well. Of course, people can email if they have any questions about schedules or about seasons. That's where everything is.
And what's like the maximum capacity for one of these tours or one of these sessions?
So I'm going to only take 6 people per session. So it's going to be very intimate.
You got to get in early.
Yeah. And I did this intentionally. I really wanted to have a very intimate experience, something where we really feel like we're sharing time and space. We're, cooking a meal together. We're sitting down at the table together. So I want to keep them pretty small.
All right. And then after February, what would be the next one?
So after February, we have one in mid-March, which is titled Vernal Equinox. So it's right around the equinox. And then we have one in late March and one in mid-April. So that's sort of the four for
Quite a few
spring.
opportunities.
Yeah. And the spring ones are all centered around foraging because that's really the season of getting out. We have from Fukinoto in February through to bamboo shoots in April. We have this wonderful string of different wild vegetables coming out every week or so.
Okay, so even if you miss out on one, there's always more opportunities, but you got to go to mirukashi.life. That would be where all the information is.
Yes, and they're filling up quickly.
Yes, wonderful.
And we also have two as well in the autumn.
Gotcha.
So again, we're looking
basically year round
out,
is what you're looking to keep going, right?
Yeah, to really accentuate the best seasons for eating. And for me, that's spring and autumn.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, that sounds, like I said, something that like I would enjoy. Anything eating and meeting people. Like one of the fun parts of doing any sort of job with interviews is you get to talk to these people, and then they take you out, and then they show you everything, and they're like, hey, eat this. Like, okay, I'll get it.
Yeah.
I love that
wonderful
stuff.
experiences.
Yeah. And then you can do that for other people. So that's pretty fun.
I'm really excited to share it. This is, these programs are really coming out of the life that I have created there and that I absolutely adore, living by the seasons and living by the flavors of the seasons. And so for me, it's just a really exciting opportunity to be able to share that with other people.
Yeah. No, awesome. Very exciting stuff. So, of course, I'll include the link in the show notes for anybody that wants to know more. But I think it's pretty easy to remember mirukashi.life. But Prairie, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing what you're working on.
Thank you. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Just do it!